would, so folks, start coming down to the front if you'd like to ask questions. I've got one to kick it off. Can you tell a story about one of your coaches, and I'm particularly a funny story or something that just tells you what kind of person that coach is, and I don't know if it's, I'm a baseball guy, so and I'll follow up with other stuff later.
I can give you a good Dan McDonald story from the last week. So Dan, I'm pretty well convinced, since Dan isn't on social media, he thinks nobody else is on social media. And so we had to twist his arm to be a judge at the dunk contest for Louisville Live Friday night. It's like, Dan, this is going to be really good from a recruiting standpoint. We're going to get a jersey made for Jack Harlow, a baseball jersey. You're going to get the chance to give it to him. Recruits are going to love this. I'm not sure I want to do it. And finally convinced him it was worth his time. And I saw we had a head coaches meeting yesterday, and he told me, he goes, man, he's like, I had no idea that 17 and 18-year-olds really like Jack Harlow. He said family, nephews, nieces. He said, I'm like the most popular guy there is right now because of what's on social media. I'm like, that's how this thing works, Dan. That's how this thing works. So, but I would tell you, from a coaching standpoint, and you look at our coaches, a lot of them have been here for quite a while. But I'm really, really happy with the group of coaches that we have. Really, really happy. They are a really, really good group. Like I said, they demand a lot, but I want to give them a lot because they, I think every one of them, and this may sound a little odd, but every one of them wants what's in the best interest of their student athletes. They don't put themselves first, and it's what Kenny says. I want to help them achieve their dreams, and I feel like we have coaches across the board that want that. So it's a lot of fun right now, to be honest with you. Yeah.
First and foremost, Mike Brumley. First and foremost, I want to thank you and your predecessor Vince for bringing some integrity back to the program. It means a lot to me, and that you stuck around as well to weather the storm. I kind of two questions. The first dealing with the second. Naming NILs. If we're just talking the top sports for women and men, what percentage of athletes are actually getting the good money? And number two, what can the university do? Because you touched upon it a little bit. The danger is that the SEC might take over football. And then it becomes, hey, let's make this a club sport, like most of Europe deals with.
Yeah.
Where it has nothing to do anymore with the university. It has nothing to do with college education. You give every kid, maybe a lineman in this case that's getting zero today, hey, we'll give you $150,000 out of high school. You can do whatever you want with that money. You can go to college. You can spend half on it in college, half of it here. What can we do to stem that tide, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. So answer your first question. And I can only speak for Louisville here. I think that we have set up a pretty good model from an NIL standpoint, and I don't think that it's, I don't want to say it's not artificially inflated. Any Power 5 program that's dealing in the NIL space, that market's a little bit artificially inflated just based on you have people that want to support the program. And so are they necessarily making the best business decision? Like, hey, I want this student athlete to tweet this out or put this on Instagram. Is it worth the value that they're paying that student athlete if they just did it from a straight marketing standpoint? Probably not. But I do think that we have more of a true market than a lot of places in the country because we have a community that supports our program, I would contend, like any other. And it's not just, like I said, artificially inflated by donors who say, hey, I just want to give money to them. A lot of times there has to be some sort of component, whether it's a community service component that they've tried to tie some NIL pieces around, or it truly is, hey, I think this could impact the business that I'm running. And so to answer your question, there's we have very few right now, football, basketball, that have big time, significant, call them six-figure deals. Our most popular student athlete's Haley Van Lith. If you look at what she's done from a social media following, and I would tell you the way that she has structured her representation, she's represented by a premier agency in the country, and she's very selective with the deals that she and the companies and the organizations that she partners with. And so I think that's one of the hardest things is getting all of our student athletes to understand that no matter what decision you make, that's part of your brand. And so if you say, hey, I'm going to take that $20 deal that, some company that nobody's ever heard of is giving me, well, you just accepted a deal that might decrease the value of your brand. And so right now, from a pure student athlete, hey, just want to go out and get these big time deals. We don't, I don't know if I tell you, we probably don't have one that's very significant that really moves the needle. And then going back to your second question, I think what's interesting to me is you have a couple of organizations that are talking about how these student athletes are exploited and they're taken advantage of, and they're going, they're swinging the pendulum to the far side, and I don't think anybody's really tried to swing the pendulum to the complete opposite side, to your point, and say, hey, if we start paying them or they're employees, what does that mean? If you think about an education and a scholarship and all the support services that we're providing, none of that's taxed. And so the value that they're getting is much more significant than say, hey, we're just going to give you $75,000. Okay, well, you start taxing all those things and everything that we do, what's your value then? And so, there's just some different things that I think if we talked about the whole story, I think it would be a little bit different. Now, I would also tell you that I think a lot of the things that some of these organizations want, we're doing. We provide health care. We provide health care once they graduate. And we do some different things that, like I said, they're asking for, we're already doing. And I say it all the time, that's on us. We've got to do a better job of telling our story. And so that's what we're trying to do. But like I said, as I talk to parents, I talk to recruits, a large majority of them, they don't want to be employees. They realize the consequences that come with that. It's pretty easy to say, hey, you didn't do your job, so now you don't have one. And we don't, this idea that we pull scholarships, I'm not saying we, I'm talking about the industry as a whole. I couldn't tell you one time that we just said, hey, you're not living up to your expectations, we're taking your scholarship away. If you're doing things that you really shouldn't be doing from a team standpoint, from an attitude standpoint, then, and it's not just, hey, we're pulling that. It's like, hey, you've got to get better. You've got to do some things differently. And they get every chance they can possibly have to right that, correct it, and end up being successful. So, I think if we can have constructive conversations about it, that we can find solutions here. I really believe that.
President Chris Monzo here, Principal Sandbox Design. An academic and spent a lot of time on campus and various campuses. Really applaud your very clear goals. I think that's phenomenal. How do you see that impacting the broader culture at UofL and the academic kind of larger picture? And then real quick, just wanted to give a shout out to Joe's Palm Room for hosting us today.
Awesome. Yeah, so from an academic standpoint, if we can help drive excellence on the academic side, that's what I want to do. I absolutely want to do that. If we can help improve the academic standing for the university, athletics will help wherever we can. And I go back to, I want us to be really good at everything we do. That includes academics. And I would tell you that, I don't want to say every time, but a large majority of the time, it's like, hey, really want to go to school here, want to play for this coach or that coach. I can't pass up the opportunity to go to this academic institution. That's a lot of times that's how we lose recruits, because we're competing against the Stanfords and the Dukes. And, I say it all the time because I use the example Arthur, our swim coach, he's been right there with some of the best swimming recruits in the country. And even when I was at Villanova, he called me one time. He's like, "Hey, it's between us and Stanford." I'm like, "What is that kid even thinking?" I mean, from an academic standpoint, like, my kids wouldn't have a choice. Hey, you're going to Stanford. And so how can we make sure that we're giving them a reason not to come to UofL from an academic standpoint? So that the business school, the engineering school, they're some of the better ones in the country. And we've got the opportunity to do that. We're in a really good neighborhood in the ACC from an academic standpoint. I mean, a really good neighborhood. And so how do we make sure that we're capitalizing on that to have some of the best academic programs in the country? Because as much fun as it is to say that you're really good at sports, and I really, really enjoyed when I was at Villanova saying we're really good at both. Really good at both, because that's college athletics, and that's where I want the University of Louisville to be.
Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Larry Sloan. I'm a season ticket holder for both the men's and women's basketball and for the volleyball.
Man, you're busy.
And yeah, I am. But happily so. My question is, I'd like to understand the difference that you have to deal with between men's and women's athletics. So do you have to have the same number of teams in each category, or do you have to have the same number of players and coaches, or how does that work?
So it's the quickest way to boil it down to is strictly from a Title IX standpoint, is are you providing the same amount of opportunities in relation to the percentages of male and female student athletes you have on campus? So if we have, let's say, 55% women, 45% male on campus, then those are the numbers that have to be reflected with our roster sizes in athletics. So teams are irrelevant. It's about roster spots and total roster spots that we create for our men and our women. And it was COVID actually made it difficult because we set our roster limits so that we attain we're within 1 or 2 percentage points of that. But what happened is the NCAA essentially allowed everybody an extra year to compete. And so we granted any fifth years that wanted to come back, we gave them that opportunity. And so our roster sizes grew, and we didn't have the limits on them that we would have normally put on them. And then with that, we also have female enrollment that's been going up at UofL. So we've had to combat that by reducing some of our men's roster sizes. But that's the long and the short of it. Philosophically, I want our women's sports to have the exact same as our men's and vice versa. It shouldn't even be a discussion of, well, the men get this, and I think we can provide the women with close to that. No, it's something that I get frustrated with in that, like, well, do we have to do that? We don't, like, it's not a matter of have, we should, period. And it goes back to those resources. I don't want, when we get down to the Final Four, it's the slimmest of margins. It is the slimmest of margins. So, when let's say we contract with a low-cost charter company, and our flight's delayed coming back from Boston, and they get home at 4 in the morning instead of, call it, midnight. Well, that's going to have an impact. And so it's those things that I think a lot of people don't realize. It's hotels, it's charter companies, it's how they eat, how they travel, things like that. And if we're not treating everybody similarly, it makes a difference. It impacts them. So.
Josh, Dan Hartledge, football season ticket holder. I was one of the 9,000 last night. Good time. Question regarding these pending NCAA sanctions that we've been waiting on forever. What do you know, and what do you expect?
I can tell you about the same that you know. Obviously, the NCAA is very strict about talking about any of this. But if you look at, there's been 2 cases that have been decided already by the IARP, the Independent Accountability Review Panel. And you look at the dates of when they had their hearing relative to when they had their decision. You can do the math and presume, based on those 2 previous cases, that we will have a decision. I would presume I just call it sooner than later. I'll let this group do the math, and that's based on those two previous cases. Now, I'm not going to tell you that they rely on those two previous cases. I mean, it could be a month, it could be 6 months from now. But if you look at consistency, then I would expect it sooner than later. And then once again, I'm just basing this off of the two previous cases. And it looks like they are trying not to impact the student athletes that had nothing to do with the allegations at those previous institutions. And so, does that give me a little bit of hope? It does. But once again, I want to be realistic and want to make sure that when that decision does come, does get handed down, that we're ready to prepare for it, or we are prepared for it, whatever that may be. And at the end of the day, though, I think if there's, I don't want to call it excitement, but the opportunity to move forward. It's been 5+ years. I mean, think about that. 5 years. It's hard to believe. And so, whatever the decision is, there will be some relief. That's probably the right word. That's behind us. That other schools can't say, "Hey, this is happening," or that's happening, because it'll be fact at that point, and we can move forward. The men's basketball program can move forward. The department can move forward. And quite honestly, this community, this fan base can move forward. So that's where we're at with it right now.
Thank you, Josh. Would you